The Charlotte Hornets couldn't continue to be a play-in tournament regular through the 2022-23 season, thanks to the off-court mess of Miles Bridges and the injuries to Lamelo Ball. Despite the poor season, the team did show significant upside, especially post-All-Star break, and will enter the offseason with the fourth best odds in the draft lottery, alongside another 4 additional draft selections. So let's discuss said mentioned upside that was showcased after the All-Star break and what could be in line for the Hornets offseason. Lamelo Ball struggled to stay on the floor this year, but he proved why he made an All-Star team in year 2 when he did play. Throughout his 36 games, he put up a career high in points and assists, all while hitting 4 threes a night, a number that was only bested by Curry, Clay, and Dame this season. His efficiency did drop a bit, but considering the fact that he did so on the greatest volume of his career, and whilst losing the team's leading scorer from the 2021-22 season, that being Miles Bridges, it's not of significant concern. Lamelo continued to showcase his elite shot creation upside, especially from three-point range, as well as his elite playmaking. The biggest concern for Lamelo moving forward will simply be staying healthy. Lamelo has proven that he is an all-star caliber guard when playing and when healthy, but he's only played 162 games throughout his first 3 years in the league. Staying healthy is going to be the key to his future success, as well as key to the Hornets' future success as they move into next season. PJ Washington positionally was the direct Miles Bridges replacement as he played throughout his contract year, and although he certainly is not as talented, especially in the offensive end, as Miles Bridges, PJ did very well stepping back into the starting lineup full-time. Washington posted career highs in points and minutes, and although his efficiency from 3 did fall, he did improve his shot creation. Interestingly, PJ was only around league average in catch-and-shoot three-point shooting efficiency, whilst he was top 25% in pull-up three-point shooting efficiency. We will discuss his upcoming free agency momentarily, but he certainly stepped in well in year 4 whilst continuing to be an important part of this Hornets offense. Arguably, the biggest struggle for the Hornets roster as far as their roster construction has gone over the last few years, and arguably over the last decade, has been the center position. But it finally appears that the Hornets have their future solidified in the paint. First and foremost, that comes down to Mark Williams, who was the Hornets' first selection in the 2022 draft. But despite the need for a center, Steve Clifford seemed very unwilling to get Mark Williams involved in the rotation early in the season. Thankfully, Williams finally got his opportunity after Christmas, and he did not disappoint when he was given the opportunity. Before Williams' arrival into the rotation, the Hornets had a bottom 5 defense in the NBA. After his inclusion into the rotation, for the remainder of the year, the Hornets were a league average defense. After the All-Star break, where Mark Williams assumed the starting center role, the Hornets had one of the best defenses in the NBA. The rim protection of Mark Williams influenced the Hornets' defensive turnaround significantly, whilst also being a solid rebounder, and for a rookie big man was also a very efficient free throw shooter. Williams has certainly earned the starting center role for next season in Charlotte, and it appears that the Hornets finally have a bright future at the center position. Nick Richards also solidifies the upside at the center position for the Hornets, as Richards was a consistent and significant part of the Hornets rotation this season, whilst on the way to the best season of his 3-year career. Richards continues to be a really good rebounder, an effective offensive player in the pick and roll, and a solid piece of the Hornets' defensive unit. The Hornets now possess 2 legit 7-footers who are both under contract for at least the next 3 years, as they finally enter next season with the best front court options they have had in a very long time, both of which who have upside, especially in the case of Mark Williams, who will only be entering year 2 next season. Kai Jones and JT Thor also round out some of the other big man depth for the Charlotte Hornets moving into next season. Kai Jones will likely remain the 3rd center on this roster for the next couple of years, but what his role is beyond that remains unclear. Jones did become more of a rotational piece last season, but his efficiency from the field fell significantly. He shot the ball much better from the free throw line, and he improved his rim protection throughout the course of the season, but his offensive game likely needs to improve, and Mark Williams and Nick Richards certainly remain ahead of him in the rotation heading into next season. JT Thor offers a lot of length himself, but his ability to slide down to the 4 and shoot from the 3-point line might give him a little bit more of a chance to break into the rotation. although, depending on the Hornets offseason, he may struggle to regularly get minutes as well heading into next season, depending on free agency decisions and what they do with those 5 draft selections. Jace Bouknight is another fun young guard on this team who, throughout his first 2 seasons, has struggled to get comfortable in the NBA. The young scoring guard has been extremely inefficient when he has got minutes, and those inefficiencies have made it very difficult for him to break into the rotation. With Lamelo Ball and Terry Rozier ahead of him, it's a very difficult backcourt for him to find minutes in. But depending on the offseason ahead and the offseason decisions for Dennis Smith Jr. and for Kelly Oubre, some of those bench minutes could end up opening up for the former lottery selection. Bryce McGowens is another young guard on the Hornets who will be fighting for minutes heading into next season, and the 2022 second-round selection had himself a solid enough rookie season to earn him a 4-year deal, and in turn, you would expect will at least be given a chance to crack the rotation at times next season. And the backcourt is rounded out by Dennis Smith Jr., who had himself a nice little resurgence into the NBA last year, proving with the Hornets that although he may not be living up to the hype that was previously held for him earlier in his career, he certainly has the ability and talent to be a solid backup point guard in the NBA. The Hornets are, of course, a very young roster with some upside, but a few veterans kept the Hornets' 2022-23 season alive. Terry Rozier, as previously mentioned, is, of course, one of those guys, and he played a very big role last year for the Hornets, also playing a significant part in helping to replace the production of Miles Bridges and playing the majority of the season without all-star Lamelo Ball. Now, whilst having to carry this load of losing nearly 40 points per game from the 2021-22 roster for a majority of the season, Rozier did have his worst season in terms of efficiency, but this was also the greatest volume of his career by a long shot, and in turn it led to a career high in points and assists. Assuming that LaMelo can stay healthy, Rozier can slide back into more of a secondary role next season and can continue to be a very key part of the Hornets offense in terms of his shot creation and his playmaking ability. Kelly Oubre picked up a significant portion of the Hornets scoring last season as well on his way to a career year. Again, similar to Rozier, the increased volume did hurt his efficiency slightly from his first year in Charlotte, but he did record a career high in points. It's not certain whether he will remain in Charlotte for next season as he enters the summer as an unrestricted free agent, but we will discuss that momentarily. Gordon Hayward is the third vet who played a significant role in any amount of success the Hornets could potentially have this year, and he played 50 games for the first time since joining the Hornets. Hayward is certainly not playing up to his $30 million a year contract and did struggle from 3 last year, but he's still a solid complementary piece to have on the wing. But of course, with only 1 year left on his deal, as he finally nears this $30 million a year deal, which roster he will complement next season remains to be seen, as the trade rumors will likely continue around Gordon Hayward heading into the summer. The Charlotte Hornets enter free agency with 2 key parts of their rotation that they will have to either re-sign or let walk this offseason. PJ Washington enters the offseason as a restricted free agent, and although retaining him is likely near priority number 1 for the Hornets offseason outside of their draft selection in the lottery, it's relatively certain he will be in the Hornets starting lineup next season. Washington has indicated his desire to return to the Hornets for the foreseeable future. The only matter of contention will be how much the Hornets starting power forward gets paid. PJ is certainly a solidified starting caliber player in the NBA, but he's certainly nowhere near all-star level, and he's not a guy who's really in threat of losing his starting position on this roster. He's simply the definition of a starting level power forward, which there honestly isn't many comparables for in the NBA, especially from a salary standpoint. The likes of Jeremy Grant and Aaron Gordon, guys who you could argue are slightly borderline all-star caliber guys who are certainly at a higher level of production than PJ Washington, are making about $20 million a year, likely a bit above PJ's value. The most comparable values, at least on the high end, are probably Harrison Barnes at 18.5 and Jonathan Isaac at 17.5 mil heading into next season, and the low end being Dorian Finney-Smith and Chris Boucher at around 15 million. Where he falls in that range remains to be seen, but I would expect somewhere between 15 to 18 million a year is a relatively reasonable price for PJ Washington as the Hornets look to lock down their power forward of the future. Kelly Oubre Jr. is the veteran who will enter unrestricted free agency for the Hornets after having a career year, and will certainly be looking to capitalize on said career year as he gets a new deal this summer. Oubre has indicated that he would like to remain in Charlotte long term, so the possibility certainly exists where Oubre returns next season for the Hornets, possibly as a sixth man, but possibly slided into the starting lineup depending on what happens with Gordon Hayward, which we will discuss shortly. The questions primarily are going to be how much money are the Hornets willing to pay him, especially after they lock down PJ Washington, and if his role will indeed be as a sixth man, if that role is acceptable to Kelly Oubre, or will he rather go and be a day one starter elsewhere if he gets said opportunity. Those questions will indeed be the benchmarks for determining where Kelly Oubre plays next season. The other Charlotte Hornets free agents are significantly less important than PJ Washington or Kelly Oubre. Dennis Smith Jr. will enter this offseason as an unrestricted free agent after a solid season as the Hornets' backup point guard. Of course, backup point guard is relatively replaceable in the NBA. There are a lot of dudes who are 6 foot compared to dudes that are 6'9". And so there's a lot of options headed into this offseason for the Hornets as to who they want to fill that backup point guard role. The Hornets have a plethora of draft selections this year, which they could use to supplement their guard depth. Of course, the Hornets could also promote from within and entrust James Bouknight with a greater role this season. But they also could just re-sign Dennis Smith Jr. or explore other free agent point guards this offseason. There's a list of point guards that will be entering free agency that includes Gabe Vincent and Javon Carter, who are probably more likely to re-sign, but also include Kendrick Nunn, Corey Joseph, Ish Smith, and Frank Ntilikina. So I would imagine the Hornets undertake a combination of these options, but it remains unclear whether Dennis Smith Jr. will actually be back in Charlotte for next season. Personally, I expect Dennis Smith Jr. to be brought back or another veteran to be signed in free agency, whilst James Bouknight or a new rookie guard will be given some opportunity off the bench. I doubt there will just be a single one of those three options that are undertaken by the Hornets front office this offseason. Zvima Hailuk will also be entering as an unrestricted free agent, and he shot the ball relatively well after being acquired at the trade deadline and could be brought for a little bit more shooting off the bench and a little bit more wing depth, but the Hornets could also look to the draft or some free agency options to fill that wing depth. The most important part of the Hornets offseason, which won't require any real difficult thinking and will be an obvious decision, is giving Lamelo Ball his rookie max extension of $204 million over the next 5 years. Locking up their star for the next 5 years is absolutely crucial, even with his injury concerns, and I am certain the Hornets will be completing this extension the moment that they are eligible to do so. I don't expect the Hornets to be involved in any big-name trades this offseason, but where they could get involved in the trade rumor mill is with Gordon Hayward. He enters the last year of his 4-year deal with the Hornets, and whilst coming off of his first 50-game season on said contract, it is possible that finally, with only 1 year left, someone looks to move off of other expiring contracts and a pick for Gordon Hayward. This may not happen until the trade deadline, but it is a move that will be talked about, that will be in the rumor mill, and will be worth keeping an eye on throughout the offseason up to potentially the trade deadline of next season. Note a Gordon Hayward trade would leave the Hornets without a starting small forward next year, meaning a Gordon Hayward trade early this summer could make a Kelly Oubre return significantly more likely if, as discussed previously, he does desire to be a day one starter somewhere in the NBA next season. Terry Rozier is also another veteran who has been involved in rumors in the past on this Hornets roster, but with 3 years left on his new deal, his role next to Lamelo Ball is likely safe in Charlotte for the time being. It should be a relatively quiet offseason for the Hornets in terms of the trade market outside of a potential Gordon Hayward trade. Kelly Oubre Jr. sign and trade is possible depending on how high his market value goes and to what team he signs with. But it's also very possible he is simply signed with cap space by another team in the NBA. And it's also very possible that Gordon Hayward doesn't get traded. The only other avenue for the Hornets to potentially make some trades is heading into the 2023 draft, where they do have those 5 selections. Specifically, they have 4 selections between pick 27 and 42, and so that is where some trades could end up being made. Heading into the 2023 draft, the Hornets do have pick 4, or at least the odds for pick 4, as well as picks 27, 34, 39, and 42. With all of these selections, the Hornets have the potential to A, add another future starter with pick 4, potentially the Gordon Hayward replacement, whilst adding several potential future role players, including a potential bench wing, a potential backup point guard, supplementing the depth that may end up leaving this roster this offseason. Now, given the significant amount of draft selections that the Hornets do have, specifically those aforementioned picks between pick 27 and pick 42, the Hornets could be involved in some draft day or draft night trades, of which there are likely 3 options. Firstly, the Hornets could use the timing of the draft and some of their late selections to move off of Gordon Hayward. With 1 year left on his deal, Hayward could finally be a movable contract, as previously discussed, and the Hornets could draft his replacement with their first round selection. Some of their later picks in the draft could be added as some additional value to the Gordon Hayward package if required to move off of his salary. The Hornets could also package 2 to 3 of their picks from 27 through 42 to move up in the draft and acquire someone higher up on their draft board. Adding 4 more young players to this roster that already has so much young talent that is already fighting for and struggling to find regular rotational minutes seems like a bit of a surplus to requirements and a logjam that is going to cause more problems than is going to help their roster. The Hornets could be much better off moving into the top 20 of the draft and selecting a role player they believe can make an impact on their bench more immediately and be more impactful moving forward. The third option is that the Hornets could look to add a high-level veteran onto their bench immediately whilst trading away a combination of their picks 27 through 42 and a combination of their young players who are currently on the roster struggling to find minutes, such as James Bouknight, Kai Jones, and JT Thor. The Hornets enter this draft with plenty of young and future assets and have the option to make a move to improve their team immediately, speed up their retool, and make a push back for the play-in tournament this season. All 3 of their options are good, valid options. The only option that is bad and that the Hornets cannot do is to sit on all 5 of their draft selections. They're certainly going to use their lottery selection, but the other 4 need to be moved off of in some combination to improve this roster. The Hornets enter this offseason and especially enter this draft with an absurd amount of flexibility. The key will be making the right decisions with their selections and with the amount of flexibility they have. The Charlotte Hornets should enter the 2023-24 season much more competitively than they just were a year previous. Key number 1 is obviously going to be Lamelo Ball needs to stay healthy. Lamelo is their star, he is undoubtedly their best player, and without him on the court, they will continue to struggle to push for the postseason. Assuming he is healthy, they should stand a chance on most nights against most teams. With Mark Williams in the lineup from day 1, hopefully alongside a newly re-signed PJ Washington, the Hornets should be a significantly improved defensive team from day 1 of the season compared to their first half of the 2022-23 season. This improved defense alongside an already good offense led by Lamelo Ball and another lottery selection should be enough for the Hornets to bounce right back into the play-in tournament conversation. How impactful those rookies are, what internal improvements are made, and how healthy Lamelo Ball is, and what trades they also make around the draft will be those small differences around the fringes that could push them a little bit outside of the play-in tournament or could push them right back in to the play-in tournament conversation. But most importantly, if Lamelo Ball is healthy, the Charlotte Hornets should be involved in the play-in tournament discussion at the end of next season.